Hello and welcome back to our nutritional strategies to enhance performance. We are now focusing on hydration techniques to enhance performance and recovery. So water makes up approximately 40 to 80% of our body mass, and the role of water is to transport nutrients and wastes, to dilute waste products, to regulate body temperature, and it's also used in chemical reactions of the body. So a sedentary adult requires approximately 2 litres of fluid per day, and hydration is the process of consuming adequate water into the body. So it's essential to be adequately hydrated as it reduces the risk of dehydration as well as heat-related illness such as heat stroke. It also helps to maintain cardiovascular function. It helps us to improve our performance during vigorous physical activity so that we don't, because dehydration is a form of fatigue, and it also helps us to maintain good health. And our water requirements vary according to factors such as environmental conditions, the individual's body size and surface area, metabolic rate. People with a faster metabolism require greater amounts of water, our physical activity levels, the amount that we lose in sweat. Some people are known to be real sweaters. Pat Rafter was a good example of this. Your age and gender also impacts upon sweat loss. So basically it's a very individual thing as well. Now, it's important to maintain a hydration plan for athletes because it can sometimes be really difficult for athletes to ingest an adequate amount of fluid to offset that large volume of sweat that they lose during physical activity. So a way in which they can maintain a hydration plan is by performing monitoring the change in their body mass before and after exercise. So the way they do this is they weigh themselves before training or competition and then after. They wear minimal clothing, make sure they towel themselves off before weighing themselves. They must make sure they record the volume of fluid consumed during training or competition because that will impact upon the results. And then they calculate the change in body mass before and after urination. And basically 1 kilogram of body weight is equivalent to 1 litre of fluid. So the hydration methods are consuming water, consuming sports drinks, and intravenous drips that we're going to be focusing on that are included in our key knowledge. Water is effective in maintaining a state of hydration. It is absorbed as quickly as sports drinks. However, there are some implications with using water. It does dilute our electrolytes, and we do need electrolytes in order to maintain nerve impulses and muscular contraction, electrolytes being potassium, calcium, sodium, chloride. It also doesn't provide any energy, and we'll look at that later, how it's important for long duration events. We need to replace energy that's lost or used up. It can cause bloating when consumed in large amounts, and it can also stimulate urine output. So therefore, you don't necessarily maintain an adequate state of hydration. So let's look at dehydration, which is one of the most important causes of fatigue, particularly for endurance athletes and particularly in hot conditions. As fluid intake, as I mentioned before, can be really difficult to maintain. Fluids needed by the body can be very difficult to meet those demands because even a 2% loss in body weight of fluid can actually result in dehydration. So let's have a look at the different percentages in the next one. Oh, sorry, that's the next one. Let's go to that one. So if we have a look, a 2% loss in body weight can actually cause an impaired performance. So say, for instance, it's a 60 kilogram athlete. That means that basically if they lose 2% of their body weight, so 1.2 kilograms, which therefore means that they've lost about 1.2 litres of fluid caused by dehydration, which will therefore impair their performance. If they lose 4%, that decreases their capacity for completing muscular work. If they lose 5%, it can cause heat exhaustion. If they lose 7%, it can cause hallucinations. If they lose 10% of their body weight, which for the 60 kilogram athlete would be 6 kilograms, which therefore is 6 litres, that can lead to circulatory collapse and heat stroke. Now let's go back to the last one. So dehydration is detrimental to performance, and the reason why is it causes these things. It causes an elevated body temperature, which, as we know, therefore means that the blood has to be distributed to the surface of the skin, so that we can get rid of the heat that builds up in the body, so it can be dissipated from the surface of the skin, which therefore the blood flow going to the surface of the skin means that there is less blood flow going to the muscles, so that results in the increase in perceived exertion that's listed here. They feel like they're working harder because there's a decrease in blood flow to the working muscles. This can therefore, because we have less blood volume going to the working muscles, that therefore results in an increase in heart rate and stroke volume, which therefore puts more stress on the heart. There's also a decrease in the rate of gastric emptying that can cause gastrointestinal discomfort. And another big problem with dehydration is it can cause a decrease in decision making, concentration, and motor control. So that's some, really detrimental things as a result of being dehydrated. It can eventually cause nausea, loss of consciousness, and also can be fatal. So the way in which people monitor their dehydration is the pre and post weighing, changes to body mass that I mentioned before. Also, a sign if their urine is very dark in colour is a signal that somebody's dehydrated, and also having just a small volume of urine, and also an increased thirst. That's why it's important that athletes make sure they drink before they're thirsty, because being thirsty is a sign that you do not have enough fluid in your body, and you want to make sure you maintain a good hydrated state to reduce fatigue. Therefore, you're avoiding decreasing performance. So fluids need to be consumed before, as well as during the performance, as well as in recovery, so that the body can maintain that body temperature, so that you don't get a decrease in performance. Now, have a look at that YouTube there. You'll see the first women's Olympic marathon, the Summer Olympics, and it took her 5 minutes to complete that last lap that she did, and it's just excruciating watching her suffering from heat exhaustion. Now, preventing dehydration, athletes should have a drinking plan for fluid and electrolytes rather than waiting till a substantial fluid deficit has occurred. Don't wait till you're thirsty. Also, the plan needs to consider your environment, your training load, the amount of fluid that you've consumed, and the timing of fluid consumption and sports drinks. And you really want to practice that in your training so that you've really got it nailed prior to competition. Here are some signs and symptoms of dehydration compared to heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Have a look at those. And then we've got intravenous hydration. So intravenous hydration is the administration of a fluid. So basically it's usually a saline fluid. It may also contain glucose, and it's administered through a vein. So IV hydration has been used for fluid replacement. Generally speaking, where they've lost consciousness, it happened with the athlete that you saw if you watched that last YouTube that I mentioned. She was put on an IV drip straight away. Many Tour de France cyclists, they often will go on an IV drip at the end of their day's competition during the tour, not only to make sure that they increase their carbohydrate stores because they find it hard to eat enough, but also to get into an adequate state of hydration. And people who are unable to drink after their performance because they're suffering stress or they're feeling injured, IV hydration can certainly be effective. However, for people who are mildly dehydrated, oral hydration is just as effective. So it is beneficial for severe hydration. It doesn't cause as much bloating. Sorry about that spelling mistake. However, it is banned by WADA and the AFL. It was originally used in the early 2000s by the Brisbane Lions, and since then there was quite a lot of controversy, and it has now been banned by the AFL. It does require hygienic conditions because they're administering the IV solution through a vein. There is also a danger of fluid overload. and this can cause hypertension. So if you administer too much fluid, it can cause, so we're increasing the blood volume dramatically, which therefore puts more pressure on the walls of the arteries, increasing blood pressure or hypertension. It can therefore result in heart failure. Pulmonary edema is excess fluid on the lungs, and it can also cause kidney damage because it's too hard it puts too much stress on the kidneys to try and get rid of that fluid overload. It can also result in an electrolyte imbalance. Hyperhydration is basically where somebody does increase their stores of water too much. So they're basically consuming and going through that fluid overload that we talked about. They're consuming a lot of water. This can cause a number of different things: frequent urination, gastrointestinal discomfort because of bloating. It can increase their weight. That can be a problem in weight-restricted sports such as lightweight boxing, rowing, jockeys. And it also can result in this condition called hyponatremia, which is very extreme. It's very rare. But basically what happens is it can cause death for people who consume too much fluid. And it can happen. It's known to have happened for those people completing the Kokoda Trail. It's known for particularly women doing long duration events where they're only working at a submaximal intensity, but they just keep drinking so much. So their body doesn't need that extra fluid, but they keep drinking all the time because they can, because they're only walking. And so therefore they end up with a fluid overload, which can basically cause heart failure. Okay, hope that's helped with hydration, and I shall be back for the next one on dietary supplements.